Welcome to the Alive and Kicking podcast. I'm your host, Kay Eck, and this is where we talk to ordinary people about their extraordinary lives. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. This is actually take 2 of my interview with Lisa Stokke. Yesterday, we tried to connect and we had all kinds of problems, including technology and injuries and weird telephone line juju. I don't even know what all was going on, but I'm so happy to be here with you today and welcome.
Thank you, Kay. I'm really happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Awesome. So one of the things that also before I get started, I just want to give a shout out to all the Alive and Kicking listeners and watchers. I really appreciate so much your dedication to personal growth and to learning through the stories of others. And hopefully I'll get to share your story one day. Nice. So Lisa, one of the things that you and I have in common, and we've known each other for a number of years now, one of the things that we have in common is that we both have 4 children, 4 grown children, also 3 boys and a girl. But I think your order is a little bit different from mine. But one of the things that I really want to talk about today, amongst other things, is the parenting of grown children, which is really interesting and definitely not what I expected it would be. And even just saying those words like parenting grown children, it's a little bit odd, So I do want to get into that, and I hope that our conversation leads us there. So I thought that we would start with, could you possibly tell us a little bit about your relationship with your parents when you were a child and then later on, and how you kind of learned from that and grew from that?
Wow. Just jump right in the deep end there. Wow. Okay. I guess that's why you don't give questions up front. I'd be like, no. No, it's okay. But it's interesting. I'll just be totally candid when you said that about my parents and my childhood. And I immediately felt like these tears welling up right here. And I hope I don't cry, but I think it's just because I have been in that process over the last, 48 hours actually, or even since we've tried to connect. Like you said, we've had energetically, it's been really bumpy, which isn't totally uncommon for me. I have those, roller coasters with energy, I guess, how I process things in my life and experience them and release them and, ride higher. But I told you earlier, I had an injury yesterday, which was such a freak accident. I fell into the countertop. And if I hadn't repaired it, you would see probably a bruise right here. But what it did, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, is that it really helped to ground and center me. And that's what, I've learned has happened to us when we do have, trauma or even elation or like our births of our children or whatever. It's those things that really bring you into center in your present moment. And I think offer the opportunity to connect you to your spirit. And so that's what I've been experiencing. And the interesting thing is that as I've had that experience, I've just had all kinds of tears, flowing. It's not mental at all. I don't even know what it's really about, but it offered me that opportunity, as kind of painful and traumatic as that was. That's what the opportunity was for me, was to bring me into present moment and to release. So with that background, my childhood, I think that my childhood taught me that, if you will, was how to be strong because I didn't experience a lot of support for who I was as a child, which I think is really common. I don't think I'm unique in that way, but I remember as a child being really aware of that. My veils were pretty thin when I incarnated. I remember, for example, the experience of my grandfather who had died 2 years before I was born. And the adults around me were always telling me that I didn't know him and he died. And I had to really work hard to process that and believe that. It didn't make any sense to me. And then as I got much older, I learned more about incarnation and how this reality works and the infinite nature of our beings. Then it gave me more context for understanding my experiences as a child.
Mm.
But I was born, logistically, I guess I was born into a family in the Midwest in North Iowa, where I raised my 4 kids until I was 45, until 2014, when I moved here to Boulder, Colorado. And, and my parents were very religious, Christian. And I used to have to go to church 3 times a week. And, I think I incarnated into an existence that kept me safe, and sheltered in a sense, but it was also very controlling. So yeah, I think that there's obviously a lot of opportunities in that I have taken from it, right? As far as like really finding who you are. It's like my son, when he has driven through snowstorms with me when he was first learning to drive, he was a very, wise young man, Sam, who's 20 now. He would say, you don't become a good sailor in, peaceful seas.
Oh my God. So would you say that kind of sums up your childhood?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. So it just, I feel like when you're in that kind of environment, it really forces you to either choose to conform to what doesn't feel good, I guess, for lack of a better word, good to you, or right, or in alignment with who you truly are, or it kind of forces you to really own that and develop those characteristics and those skills and capacity to develop that and express that.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm still doing it, but yeah.
Right, of course. So how do you describe the statement that you made about the veils being very thin for you when you were young? What does that mean? What does that mean?
It means that I was very aware that there was always something, greater than me, something well beyond the experience that I was having. And I had the capacity to leave this experience when I was young, leave my identity as Lisa. And like I said, I didn't understand that when I was young. These were just experiences I was having. So I was sensitive to, beings and I guess other dimensional realities. And I lost my grandmother when I was very young. I literally just found out maybe a month ago that I was 5 when she died. And I never knew what age I was actually. And my son shared that with me, what year she died, just the other day when he was back home at my parents'. And so she was, as much as my parents, loved me and did a really good job, keeping me safe and caring for me. I think they kind of struggled to express that unconditional love. And my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, she did that for me. She was my source as a child of unconditional love. Like I always felt accepted and loved by her. And so her dying when I was 5 was like losing a mother for me. That was my mothering experience. And so I ultimately just found a way to connect with her, or maybe her with me, or both. And so when I was young, I was meditating, is what I realized when I began to do meditation more in my 30s, I was like, oh, I know this. I know this experience. And it's always been very easy for me, to meditate, meaning, connect with my purest self, my higher self, or whatever, we call it, my spirit. And so I would do that. I would just, when I would be going to sleep, I could feel when it was happening, and I would just literally leave my body. And it was very comforting. I was able to be there with her. So I think that just kind of trained me for, all the things that I would go on to do with healing work and of individuals and the planet and humanity and so forth.
Yeah. So I'm getting, is this correct if I'm saying it this way, that your experience of spirituality was much different than your parents? And was it their view that whatever you were experiencing was in direct conflict with what their understanding of spirituality was?
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair statement.
And that must have been hard for them.
Yeah, I think it was. I don't think, I still don't think they know how to necessarily experience it. My mother, I know she felt like she was doing for my benefit. So I'm not bashing her when I say that. I would have books on like Buddhism or, different alternative, biographies or whatever on the life of Jesus, or Native American, tarot cards or whatever. She would just toss that stuff in the trash, when I was a kid, or, when I was a teenager, I guess. So yeah, I think that was a struggle for me for a long time, because I really wanted them to know who I was and accept me, I guess.
Yeah.
For a long time. And, now I guess I came around to accepting them is really what happened in our relationship.
Mm.
And I'd say they accept me even if they don't know a lot about my life.
Yeah.
But it's kind of that experience that we have, I would say, that's more on that higher self level, that heart level, where we connect, because lots of times words and ideas and conversation can really get in the way, right? And so we kind of don't have that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something that we could probably use a little bit more of.
A little more conversation. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's not hard to understand how this sort of dynamic gets established, because
Yeah.
they've been told that they're responsible for your relationship with God, and that if they don't train you to accept, whatever Jesus or God in a certain way, that you're going to be in serious trouble. So it's, it comes from a place of love, but unfortunately the parameters of how the relationship with God or spirit takes place can be vast, and sometimes we're taught that's got to be this way, or the highway, or the hell way.
Yeah. Yeah. My father genuinely believes I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
And for me, I hate that for him.
For him.
And
Interesting. Right. Because
yeah.
that's a suffering, right? Like he's carrying such a heavy burden that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that way, or I don't know, for lack of a better word, organized religion, or a very dogmatic way of approaching Christianity. I've gone through my stages with that, of being really angry and upset with the way that, we've been introduced to that through fear, and not through, what I believe that, Christ or Jesus's experience was here,
Yeah.
was to really more open up the world to us, more open up what this reality is, more open up to our truest selves.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that his experience was here to introduce us to be fearful. I feel like it was really the opposite. And so in my 20s, I went through a lot of anger, at religion, and really rejected it in a big way, because I began to see how it impacted people, introduced more fear into their lives,
Yeah.
rather than, opening them up. And I mean, I know all of this, but and have experienced that as well in your own way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I hate that for my father, because it is a burden for him.
Yeah. But Lisa, can you see ways in which, I feel like this is such a common experience to motherhood? Can you see ways in which you feel responsible for the way your children live their lives?
Mm. Yeah, that's a kind of a loaded question. You already know the answer. Yes, I'll be honest and candid. Yeah, definitely. And that's been a path for me, for sure. And I'm really deep in it right now, with one of my children, because in particular, I have it with all my kids, but one in particular, of letting go. And as you've often very wisely reminded me, that the same spirit, the same energy, God, whatever it is that cares for me, is the same, that holds all of my children.
Yeah.
And so I continue to lean into that, and that even though my children don't always make the choices that I think is for their good, I just have to keep leaning into that trust. And when I communicate now, I communicate with their highest self,
Mm,
is what I do.
that's interesting.
Mhm.
Um,
It's a
I
practice.
yes, I was just going to say that this like motherhood at a certain point, like when the children are small, you are responsible for them in all these different ways. And then at some point, which isn't always clear, it switches over where they're responsible for themselves. But
Yeah.
the process of extricating yourself from that growth path that they're on is so incredibly tricky. And
Mhm.
there's so much in it for
Yeah.
us. I don't know how I would have gotten through, or I'm not through it but yet, because I'm still alive and I still have children, but I don't know
Mhm.
how I would have gotten through that process without really believing that they chose their soul on a soul level. They chose everything about their life experience. I don't know how I would have ever.
Yeah.
That could just be an illusion, and I would be so happy for it because I don't know how I would get through otherwise when you care so much about somebody to be
Yeah.
able to detach from what they're going through. It is a really difficult journey.
Yeah, it is.
Do
Mhm.
you recall, like, for your various and it happens at different stages for different children? Like, I can remember
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
when my kids were 18 or maybe a little bit older, I took some keys and I said, I'm handing your life over to you. You are now making your own decisions. But I mean, it didn't happen, like that. Obviously, there was lots of
Yeah.
messiness. But at
Yeah.
a certain point, I wanted to make clear to them that they were now, responsible for their lives. But so, can you talk a little bit about how that, has occurred for you with your kids?
Mm. Well, I'll try. I don't think we have enough time because I have four. um, I'll try to sum it up. It's because it is different for, as you know, when you have four. I learned a long time ago that each of my kids get a different mother, because of who they are. And I have a really good friend who, his name is Andy, and he runs a national organization in the field that I work in, with food and agriculture. But he's also a Jungian therapist. And he has enlightened me to a lot of these things when I have discussed things with him over the years, and some of the challenges that I've gone through. And one of the things that always stuck with me is that kind of our job, our responsibility with our children is to reflect them back to themselves, which is that I see you and you matter, and shine their light back. And so for each of my children, it's really different, how they express themselves and how they incarnate and what their light is. And I think partially, at least partially, when my kids were young, this seems important to kind of add in, is that I realized that they were not mine. And I was a mom when I was 22. So I was pretty young, and I was not in any way fully grown myself. And so I experienced that at that time, like, oh gosh, am I not bonding with my child? I thought there was something wrong with me. But over time, I came to realize that I was just tapping into the uniqueness of their experience. And as like Khalil Gibran says in The Prophet, your children, the parent is the bow and the child is the arrow.
Mm.
And we cast them forth. And life doesn't go backwards, it goes forwards.
Mm.
And so for me, I've really tried, as I've gone along in parenthood, to try and take my cues from my children and reflect back to them what it is they're needing for the time that they're incarnated. Because it was very different when I was a child, right? And when I was a teenager and when I was a young adult, and what I needed in those times and what they are experiencing and what they need now. And so I think that's basically how I tune into it. I feel like the more present I am, the more my spirit can come through and have that alignment and that centeredness. And I'm able to respond to them and be present in that moment, because all of the information, all of the wisdom, all of what we need to know that can come through our divine being is there. It's always right there. It's not in the past. It's not in the future. It's always right now. And so in trying to be a better parent all the time to my children, that's my practice, is really being present.
Mm. Wow, that is, yeah, so much. And I find too that my, so-called parenting is becoming a lot more silent and without words, and just being there for them in a quiet way with very little advice, unless something really specific is asked for. And a lot of times I feel like even when it is asked for, they already have so much more wisdom than I did at that age. So I can't even really relate to necessarily where they are with a particular issue that they might be dealing with, because they're so much further along the path than I was. I don't have the experience that would be beneficial to them. But I feel like just being that open receptacle for their story, just like I try to do with this podcast, is like really the powerful thing, that they always have a safe place to express themselves. That I fail at that all the time, because I'll throw some kind of judgment out, or I'll get in my own story, and I'm not able to do that. But that's what I strive for. But and also, like, your kids can demand more from you. Like, they want you to take responsibility for certain aspects of their life. And as a mom, your tendency is to kind of like scoop up and get the job done, but that's not necessarily what benefits them.
Right.
I want to ask you about this relationship with grown children. How has that shifted for you? Like, what do you see is your role, and how has that changed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. how has it changed? I would say I would echo a lot of what you said. It does become more of that process of being more neutral and allowing them to have their experiences. For the most part, there are some times when I do feel like, oh, this would be really bad, you know. So maybe like you might want to reconsider whatever it is. But I would say for the most part, at least I have 3 kids who have really leaned in to taking responsibility for their own lives. My Yeah, I don't think we even go into my other child, but um, and none of my kids live with me currently. But I think that for them, just knowing that I'm there, like you said, I think is really good for them. I have a practice of having my kids over every Sunday night, which is something that I learned from a friend of mine back in Iowa many years ago that she did with her adult kids. And so it's like, we're always going to have that meal on Sunday. And I think it's just a really wonderful grounding for them, because when my kids were young, the practice that I initiated, I should say, when they were young, was that I'm not raising kids, I'm raising adults. And I'm not trying to say I did that perfectly, but that was my intention. That when I had the opportunities to give them responsibility, but responsibility as a way to trust themselves, as a way to know that they had the capacity to navigate in this world, and to help foster the skills of them trusting their own knowing, their own being, their own spirit. And because I always just felt like if I wasn't here, I would want to know that they would be okay and that they knew how to thrive. And so I would say that's kind of my parenting, is when I can give them those nuggets of like, sometimes I just need to hear, it's okay, you got this. It's going to be fine. I know that you're trying to figure out how to make money to pay your rent. You got it. It's okay. You're always going to be provided for. You will always be provided for in some way. Your spirit's always going to come through for you. And because that was the thing that made the difference for me as I became an adult, because I didn't have that. My parents, I would say in their parenting of me as I got older, they did things to create more reliance upon them. And I remember telling my parents when I was in my mid-20s, I remember sitting across from them saying, have you heard the phrase, if you teach a person to fish, they'll know how to feed themselves? Instead of giving them a fish, then they don't. And my parents lots of times reflected the latter. And again, I think it was just kind of what they knew that's how they expressed their love. So I'm not trying to bash them, but the benefit for me is that I learned from that. Yeah. I could see what I was kind of lacking and what I had to give myself and how I had to parent myself as I got older, and the skills and the people that I sought around me, people like yourself, right? Who, had experience and wisdom ahead of me, and to lean into that and adopt that and then pass that on to my children. Yeah. And now I have a grandchild on the way. So that adds a whole new dimension,
Yeah, that's going to be like phase 3. Well, you'll, like, oh my gosh, I have so many questions, but let me just try to focus on that. That you're giving me like a whole new way of thinking about my own parents, because my childhood felt very much like I didn't have parents. And so I was forced into a very independent nature. And, you can definitely take that too far. You can become an island with that type of, mentality, but it did really serve me well. Like I never had a doubt that I could take care of myself, because I've been taking care of myself since I was 5 years old. So, that, yeah, but, and so like, thank you. Like I had been holding, perhaps a little bit of animosity toward my parents for that kind of upbringing, but it really was an invisible gift, the gift inside the struggle.
Right.
Um, yeah, one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about, because this was just popping up on Facebook this morning, one of my friends had posted something about motherhood. And I wanted to ask you, because you have had throughout this whole child rearing era, you have had a very high profile, demanding career. And I want to hear a little bit about how you have been able to balance being fully present for your kids while also having this demanding career. And I also want to hear about the times that you feel like you failed at that.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the failure. And that took some time for me to, I guess, forgive myself in a sense. Because I would say, like I said, I started having kids when I was 22. And so I would say from the time I was 22 until I was about 40. So for about the span of 18 years, I was mostly at home. And I reorganized my entire life around keeping my kids out of daycare as much as possible, and being able to source, clean, organic food for them, which was, when I was in Iowa, that was a 2-hour one-way drive for me, up to Minneapolis. So those were my two things, was, giving them as much of a home, at-home environment experience with me, especially in those developmental years, and then putting, good food into their bodies. And so, but then when I was 40, and my youngest son was probably around, I don't know, I guess he'd be around like 8. So in school, I began to lean more into that, I guess what you're calling that high profile work. And then I began to travel, quite a bit for my work. And without going into that specifically and focusing more on my experience with my kids, I can acknowledge that I was a single mom for a really long time. So, and my parents lived in the same town that I did. And I was fortunate to have people around me who could, who loved and cared for my kids. But it offered me an opportunity to spread my wings and have my voice. And I think do what a lot of us are kind of supposed to be doing in our 20s. And mine was kind of cut short in a sense. And so when I was 40, I picked that up, I guess. And I just really launched full on into my career. And then there was a time when I was probably around 50, I'm 52 now, when I really had a deep sadness around that, because I felt like I missed a lot. But I do feel that it was both. I was able to be home. I didn't work away from the home. I worked from home, but then I also traveled quite a bit, which I think just made me less present more than anything. I was physically there a lot, but I was less present because I was really focused on my work. I used to be happy if I got one day off a year for a few years there, and that's not an exaggeration. New Year's Day is the day I reserve for myself. We worked at least a little bit, if not a lot, every single day of the year. And I had a lot of success in the work that we did, with my co-founder back then. And, we had an advocacy organization, and we just together, just the two of us, built a list of 1 million people. And I feel like we really made a huge difference in awareness and, shifting some regulations and policies and things like that, and having people really aware of like what was going on with their food system and, corporate collusion and things like that. So I'm proud of it. And my motivation was to create a better future for my children and my grandchildren. And it still is, but now I seek more balance, with that. It seems like there was a second part to that
Yeah,
question.
what were the, how do you balance it? Now your kids are a little bit older,
Mm,
but there's still, you know, some balancing that needs to occur, right?
yeah, yeah. I think it really is in that presence.
Mm,
Like when you're with them. I mean, it's always that thing of, like you say, it's not about the quantity, it's the quality of time. And that quality of time comes in when I feel we're fully, as much as we can be, aligned in our true nature.
yeah.
And then when we show up in that way, in that, you know, higher frequency way for our kids, it offers them that opportunity to also do that.
Mm,
And I feel like that's probably the most valuable thing, honestly, that I can offer them, because as they are more aligned with their purest and truest selves, they will always be in abundance in all ways, not just financially, but in good relationships and, you know, nourishing environments and, you know, just being fed, right?
yeah.
And having that internal guidance. So I think that's probably the biggest shift for me, is that, and that's my daily practice, no matter what it is I'm doing with my work. But I guess I will add to that. And my son said this to me, actually, my middle son, Gabriel, many years ago when we still lived in Iowa. He was probably 12 years old at the time, I'm going to guess, 13. And he said, "You've raised really independent kids, Mom." And I think he was having that struggle of, like, I want my mom, you know, because he was coming into that adolescence. And I know he wanted my presence. And I do feel like there was a failure there for me to be present for him because of what was happening in my life. Um, but he, even at that time, was able to kind of lean into, like, here's what I'm gaining. I'm learning to develop my inner strength, and knowing that even when I feel like I really need my mom, um, I have me and myself and my spirit and my own strength.
Mm,
And I think he would still say that today. He's 22 now.
yeah.
And my kids are really quite independent in that way.
Yeah.
You know, they find their own support networks, and kind of, they don't call on me for a lot of material things or whatever.
Hmm.
So I guess that was the benefit in it.
Yeah. That's so hard as a mom to hear that, you know, like your absence made me stronger. Yay.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I really struggled with that for a couple of
Yeah.
years at least. Yeah.
Yeah. It relates to a comment that I was seeing a young woman express. She has a young child, her first child, and she's working in a job that she doesn't really feel aligned to, and she's feeling very taxed and overwhelmed.
Mhm.
And you, as a single parent, I'm sure had to do some work to support your children that maybe wasn't fully aligned with who you knew yourself to be.
Mm.
Well, I don't want to assume that that's true. Maybe it's not true. But have you had that experience? And if so, how did you come to terms with that?
Um, could you repeat that? How did I come to terms with what exactly?
If you had to do work to support your family that wasn't maybe fully around or aligned with your
Oh, yeah.
true self or your true interests,
Yeah.
how did you get through that?
Lots of times it was fake it to make it, I'll be honest. I went to school for psychology and social work, and that's what I majored in. And I started out in that in my early 20s. And it was fulfilling work, but I literally made like $6.50 an hour. And then I paid $2 to $3 in daycare an hour. And so when I graduated, I saw there was a job that I was qualified for in, you know, the world of social work, but it paid 18 grand a year. And I just very quickly did the math of, well, I could wait tables full time, and a babysitter could come to my house in the evening, and I could be with my kids all day. And, um, you know, I could work less hours and I can make the same or more. And so I ended up waiting tables until my daughter went to kindergarten. And then the week she went to kindergarten, I, went and I actually got trained to do massage therapy. And that was more aligned. I knew I wouldn't do that forever. I don't do that now. I probably haven't done that for 8 or 10 years, but it was a really good leap for me, but yeah, my focus was at that time, it was money, it was finances. And lots of times I had to be, creative about that. Because my goals with again, being home in those developmental years and food. and so those are my two highest goals. And so I guess that's, and waiting tables at night and making decent money, hourly, I guess, allowed me to achieve those two goals. And I guess I was fortunate that the place that I worked, there were some skills that I gained, by the owners, and observing their success patterns, right? And I don't know. I'm one of those people. I think it's when you're raised in an environment where you're not fully validated, that you can find the silver linings. It's like my friend said to me, because she kind of got stuck in Iowa for a little while with kids as well. Not that I was a bad place, I shouldn't say stuck, but you're from the Midwest, you understand. Midwest doesn't, lots of places don't fully reflect back, your, what feeds you, I guess. So she was like, I guess when you're in jail, it's good to at least educate yourself and read a book, is how she compared it, So I think that's what I've just always done. I've always been somebody who very naturally just looks for what is there for me. Like if I feel like I'm, quote, suffering, or like, as you're saying, not in alignment, which if you're not in alignment, that is suffering, right?
Yeah.
And whether it's in your relationships or where you live or where you work or whatever, being out of alignment is, I think, the definition of suffering. And so I would just look for what it was that I was there to gain in that moment, knowing that it was temporary, and also my choice. I also came to realize that anything I was experiencing was reflecting back to me what patterns and frequencies I was running, which is probably another story. And it was always my choice. And when I came to kind of realize that I had a lot more control in my life, that was the point of empowerment for me.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes it was a hard pill to swallow, but it was like, no, there's no exceptions to this. There's just no exceptions. This is my choice of what I'm experiencing.
Yeah. I think it's like the combination of taking responsibility for what is occurring in your life, and then also the trust to let go of the known and open up to the possibility that when you bring yourself into alignment, you are provided for in unexpected ways. It could just be energy. You suddenly have more energy and you can get, more stuff done in a day, or you're able to find more time to devote to whatever your personal practices might be that you're longing to explore. Or, you meet people who are willing to assist you in certain ways. And it's not always clear when you're in the letting go process. So it's like both. It's like letting go and taking more responsibility. It doesn't sound like they would go together, but they do.
Yes. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. That's when I've taken my biggest leaps, actually, is when I've let go. If things around me are just kind of getting really complex and then like messy and confusing, I'm like, okay, this is my human nature, if you will, that is kind of trying to control things and figure things out, with my head, and not operating more from this area. Actually, women, we have 4 brains, they say, where we have those neural networks that are tuning into the field of information. We're always in this quantum field where all of the information is stored of what it is the guidance that we need, the wisdom that we need, the experience of not just us, but of all that's around us. And we can choose to tap in to whatever aspect of that. And we have, neural networks, those neuroreceptors, those things that are reaching out into the field in our brain, our heart, our gut. And for women, we also have our womb, our uterus. So those are our 4 actually areas of guidance. And we can literally put our attention on those areas for guidance and information. And oftentimes when I use my brain, sometimes I need to do that, right? If I need to figure out things that are more complex, or what you might say is more, left brained. It's a process of discernment, I think, of where to tune into for certain ways of accessing information out there. I mean, I know that's probably a little bit of a rabbit hole, but that's a lot of, that's kind of what I've learned is how, I think that humanity right now is learning what and who we are. It's this process of remembering. It's this process of relearning, of reimagining. That's why with my organization, I have a program called Future and Humanity, because I think that as we are moving into the future, a lot of people are focusing on the planet and, quote, saving the planet. And of course, we need to be in, concert and harmony, with life around us and nature. But nature and Earth, Mother Earth, the organism of Earth, already has its success mechanisms. It does not need us to do anything, right? It has these cycles where it will go into an ice age, right? Or it will warm, or it will do floods or volcanoes or whatever, as that process of whatever it needs. If it needs a different temperature, if it needs more rain, if it needs less rain, if it needs minerals, whatever, to rebalance. And so I think the opportunity now is, as we learn to live in harmony with nature, we are really learning to live more in harmony with who and what we are, and rediscover this organism of humanity, of understanding that we're not separated truly. And we hear this a lot, but of course, at this time of recording, which is October of 2021, we're experiencing division and polarization like I don't think any of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. And that's another story, because I feel like that's rather intentional. But the reality is that we're not, right? We're connected. We're connected, like even our DNA. If you remove your DNA and you put it in another room, like DNA that belongs to you, like from your saliva or whatever. And I work with some scientists who have done this, and you can shift something in your field. Like they might do something that gives you an experience, and they observe that DNA is responding in the same way as the DNA in this location. And so we are communicating through our DNA. And as we're talking about children, as I began my path of my own grounding and healing and recentering and alignment and learning about who I was and accepting who I was and all of that, I knew that I was contributing to that also with my children and my grandchildren and my lineage and my ancestors, because we're truly all connected. And science is now showing us that, saying, yes, what you've always felt to be true is true. We are all connected.
That's beautiful. So what kind of advice would you give young mothers struggling with becoming aligned to who they truly are in the process of raising young children?
I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is to trust yourself. I'm having this experience right now because my daughter is like just entering her second trimester, and she's expecting her baby in April of next year. And I just told her the other day, I said, a lot of things are something that a lot of women have known. I said, generations before you countless mothers. One thing that we are now all coming around to learning, I think, in this modern era, is of not giving up ourselves, that we sacrifice. And I recognize sacrifice as something of being an old paradigm, along with fear and control.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not here to sacrifice yourself. You are here to flourish. Your child will flourish when you flourish, when you align and fully express yourself and celebrate yourself. Your children will mirror you, right? So if you are loving your being, your human, your experience, when you are leaning into all of your wounds and your fears and your failures and accepting yourself despite that, when you're flourishing, when you're expressing your skills and your talents and learning and engaging with the world, your children will do that too. And I think as moms, we would all say that we want that for our kids, but I think we are coming through a period where we learn to sacrifice ourselves for that. And I think the more that we embody it, then they will embody that too.
Mm-hmm. That's really incredibly beautiful. I love that. I second everything that you said.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful for it because it feels so incredibly timely since I was looking at all the motherhood stuff on Facebook. So I was wondering if you would like to take a ride on the lightning round train with me.
Oh boy, I didn't know about the lightning round. Do I get a prize? No, I'm kidding.
Yes, you do. It is the joy of self-expression.
Wonderful.
Okay, number one, what is your greatest fear?
My greatest fear probably is around my children, is around them, not of me leaving this earth and them not having that opportunity to have leaned into their own knowing. And that's always been my biggest fear. And I would say it's less of a fear now because my children are now between the ages of 20 to 30. And I feel like they're well on their way. I'm certainly not ready to leave them. But the other thing that I offered to them too when they were young was understanding how important each of them was to each other. You know, that they were the family unit, and they are close. And so that's really good. I have less fear these days, I guess.
Yeah. I think about all of the fear. I parented from fear, forever. And there was, like fear was ever present for me in my motherhood years. And I just think about how things could have been different if that hadn't been the case. If I had trusted more, I had known myself more, it all went along with the fact that I didn't know who I was. So I was like so fearful that I was making mistakes, and there must have been something in me that knew that I wasn't aligned. And so I couldn't be parenting from that place. I don't know. And then as they got older, I don't fear so much for what's going to happen to them. I know they're going to be fine. I worry more about what would happen to me if I didn't have them. Yeah, I still worry about that. Not so much, but yeah. Okay, number two, have you considered living off the grid?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely have. Doing a lot of the work that I have in, raising awareness, like I said, around corporate collusion in food and agriculture specifically. It's really given me an inside look over the years at how the system operates. And my biggest leaning, I guess, throughout my life into my childhood and up to now is for freedom. And so I'm always leaning into what is freedom? what truly is freedom. And it changes as I learn more and I become more in alignment. I was at a conference last week in San Francisco, and there was a man that I was talking with, and we were talking about some of the things that were, kind of going on in society. And this might sound like really cynical, but there's, some, something interesting in there to lean into. And he said, people don't want freedom, they want free stuff. And like I said, that might sound really cynical, but I was like, that's true for a lot of people. What do we think freedom is? We think freedom is, having the ability to buy and get and go where we want, right? That's what we think freedom is. And the reality is I think, no, the reality for me and what I think it is for humanity is, freedom is, again, back to that alignment, and having the ability to align with our truest nature, our purest self, that is, creating us here in this experience. And when we're in alignment with that, for me, that's true freedom. And so living off grid, I just think that's a way to, it may sound like a leap, but I was just leaning in the other day to, I'm like, oh my gosh, so much of my experience is managing the system, right? That's based on this fiat capitalism, right? That's obviously based upon fear and control. And so it's like, how much of my time do I spend, I don't know, paying bills or looking at my accounts or remembering my passwords or, making sure I have this registration or I fill out that form or, whatever. I'm like, I would probably be so depressed if I realized how much of my time and energy I actually spend doing that and not spent like, just expressing and offering and creating, right? That's been your thing that you've really offered, is like just create, right? And I think that is where we find our freedom. So in living off grid, I had this experience a couple of months ago. I went out to Massachusetts and I went to a place called Earthlands Farm, and we stayed for a few days, and it's off grid. If you wanted to grind your coffee in the morning, you had to go out back and start the generator, right? And you had to, kind of use granted, I had the opportunity for my phone, but I had to use my phone at night to get around, to brush my teeth, for a light. And at first it was a little jarring, but then it was like, you could just feel, you can be much more in tune with nature, right? Which is really what nourishes us and what brings us into our present. So I think that that's what that whole off-grid living truly offers us. And I'm not anti-technology, but I'm just more about technology that benefits humanity and doesn't control.
Beautiful. Number 3, when did you first realize that you liked yourself?
It really wasn't that long ago, actually. And I still feel like there's pieces of me that I'm claiming. And I know this because I just had this experience yesterday and this morning after I had that accident. And my immediate response was, if I was like stronger or more grounded or more whatever, this wouldn't have happened, right? And so then I dug a little bit deeper into that, and I just I observed it, I guess, and was like, okay, observe that judging. What is that? And ultimately, it was not a liking or loving, accepting, going deeper than accepting and loving or liking. My partner, Adam, would say, of course I love you. He's like, but I also like you. He's like, I think like is actually harder than love. And I get that to a degree. So I think it's interesting you chose that word, like. Mm-hmm. So there's always pieces of myself that I'm claiming, where I notice that I've left them behind, right? Yeah. Parts of my body, parts of where I feel like or don't do as well as I think I should do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's an iterative process, I guess.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Mm.
That feeling of always feeling like more. I should be doing more. I should be doing more. I should be doing it. Yeah, I suffer from that. Okay, number 4. Do you enjoy small or large gatherings, and why?
Hmm. I don't know exactly. I think I like them both for different reasons. But when I lean in, I really, yeah, I'm comfortable in both situations. But I will say in large gatherings, I think I tend to find the small gatherings.
Yeah, I was
So
just going to
maybe
say
it's
that.
small,
Yeah,
you know, where you
yeah,
find a little circle of people to
yeah, yeah.
communicate
I,
with.
I used to hate large gatherings, like concerts and stuff are really difficult for me because I was like overwhelmed by the energy. But
Oh yeah,
it's also, if you're really well grounded, it's also like really exciting, but you can't relate to that many people. So you're talking,
right.
to the people like
Yeah,
next to you and in front of you and behind you. It's kind of funny.
yeah.
Okay, number 5. Do you have a calling in life?
Yes, my calling is to just be my most brilliant self.
Well, you're killing it.
Thanks.
Okay, so did you bring a question for me today?
Hmm. What's your calling in life?
Hmm. It's actually shifting. I'm experiencing a really big shift right now. So I have had since I was in second grade, a very clear understanding of what one of my roles was here, which was to be a bridge tender from, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm calling it 3D to 5D, but it's really from suffering to love, from unknowing to knowing, from whatever. And
Yeah.
with the publication of Dear Human, I felt like that mission was complete. Like I have now done my thing, and here it is, and that my role as a bridge tender is complete. And I remember just like out of the blue telling a couple of people that was the last project that I'm going to do in support of humanity. Now I want to celebrate humanity. So
Nice.
it's like a small but significant shift for me, that I'm now thinking like, okay, that work is done. Now I get to do the next phase, which is, to celebrate the creation of our new earth together, and how I want to really explore how
Yeah.
people are doing that and
Yeah.
having fun with it, and what excuse me, kind of joy and fulfillment it's bringing them. So I feel like things are going to shift for me.
I love that. I'm glad I asked that question.
Thank you. Thank you for asking it. So, Lisa, I just want to thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I really think it's going to help a lot of moms and grandmothers and just women in general, because everybody's been parented. So
Yeah.
it's really a conversation for everybody. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Kay. It's always wonderful to spend time with you. And I always appreciate our conversations.
Same.
So
Me
thank
too.
you.
Me too.